Hi, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Align. And I want to welcome you all to our final Coach webinar for 2019. This morning, we are thrilled to have Coach Neale Lewis with us with a presentation on keeping score, how to improve performance, and power strategic execution with data. For those of you who are not familiar with Neale, he is a UK-based scale-up expert with a long track record of delivering substantial business growth and performance improvements by embracing the very best business education, habits, and tools to help companies successfully scale. Neale also serves as a leadership trainer who has inspired high-growth businesses to achieve great results while at the same time developing leadership skills. Neale has been able to help senior leaders and executives achieve such personal growth by focusing on leadership development, behavioral change, execution of high-performing teams, and psychometric testing, just to name a few. Neale is a proactive and inspirational business coach who is regularly sought out to facilitate strategic planning sessions. As a matter of fact, he just completed one earlier today for CEOs and their leadership teams. Finally, Neale is a distinguished speaker whose keynote presentations and workshops inspire and rejuvenate executive teams and employees and encourage positive and lasting organizational and personal change. I will also note that Neale was also recently the organizer of the first ever Scaling Up Summit in London. So we are honored to have him as a presenter today. Before we begin, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. So please don't hesitate to ask questions via the Zoom chat feature, and we will ask Neale to try to answer as many of those questions as he can at the conclusion of the presentation. Again, thank you all for attending this Align Coach webinar, and I will now turn the microphone and the presentation over to Neale.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Yeah, it's wonderful to be able to join you today. And as you rightly said, just come off a full day of strategic planning with one of my clients here in the UK. And actually a lot of what our focus has been on today is making sure that we've got real focus on the critical numbers that this business needs to achieve as we go into 2020. So really the focus for today's webinar is as Eugene rightly says, it's about the importance of keeping score, not only on the sporting field, but actually in the boardroom as well. And I think a lot of us, certainly those who are sports fans, will recognize there's no way you'd ever really want to go onto the sports pitch without understanding who is winning and who is losing around that. So in terms of just, not sure if it's by clicking over, oh, we go, we're up and running now in terms of moving things forward. In terms of what I want to cover off is the importance of the sporting field and the scoreboard in the boardroom. Where do key performance indicators fit into all of this? And so for some of you as well, you may also recognize the great Jack Stack in The Great Game of Business. I'm going to touch on how we can bring an inspiration from that into our planning and thinking around keeping score. Then I want to touch on a case study from Gene Brown in terms of how he uses theme, celebration, and reward to keep these things front of mind. And as Eugene said, answer any questions that you may have. So, you know, wherever you are in the world, if you're on a baseball park somewhere, you're going to have at one end of the baseball stadium a scoreboard. And you can see I was actually in Atlanta earlier in the year. First time I actually had been to a baseball game, but you know, they're watching the Braves. Actually, they I think prevailed over Milwaukee. But we could see throughout the game who is winning and losing. And I think what thing struck me about the American is where you can see all of these statistics at any given time in terms of how the pitchers are performing, how the batsmen are performing as well. Or if you're to go into Australia, at one end of the field, you're going to have the scoreboard, and you can again see who is winning and who is losing on that field of play. Or in a tennis arena, you know, again, every single sports field will have an area where the scoreboard is kept up to date in real time. Golfing is just the same. Looking at the Ryder Cup, the analysis that you can do around that again to see who is winning or losing. But you just come back from a wonderful 3 weeks in Japan, where the Japanese put on a wonderful rugby show. And even if you're in the stadium, you can see the scoreboard somewhere. But even if we're watching it from off the field, somewhere will tell us, and in this case, Japan scored a historic, famous victory over Scotland to progress into the quarterfinals. But on the TV, we can again see who is winning and who is losing around these things. And then as you bring this thing more towards the business arena, I think that we can then turn to Formula One. You know, yes, sports is where it's at, but actually this notion of the importance of the whole team, marginal gains, those 1% improvements that may be the difference between winning or losing. Lewis Hamilton has recently been anointed as the Formula One world champion for this year. And you know, as a sportsman, he is obsessive about where he can make improvements on his lap time. How can they change the tires more quickly, working as a team? In fairness, Max Verstappen in the picture here just set a world record for the fastest ever lap change, just of 1.8 seconds. And these guys will know on their scoreboard that's something they can improve on, and maybe the difference between winning or losing in that particular race. And as we come into somebody that actually I hold dear as a business sort of coach, stroke sporting coach now, is Sir Dave Brailsford. He comes from the same city as myself in Derby in the United Kingdom. And Dave talks about this notion of marginal gains. And the marginal gains is something that he talks about in this quote. We're always striving for improvement, for those 1% gains in absolutely everything that we do. And I'm going to touch about this more, about how we can bring the notion of marginal gains. So from him on the cycling team that went on to win Olympic gold medal in London, the marginal gains in terms of the design of the bike, the design of the kit that the guys are wearing, the design of the helmets, the way that they have their shoes tucked in, just again to make improvements through the air, aerodynamics, all these 1% marginal gains, you aggregate those up, have an impact on their overall performance. It doesn't necessarily just need to be on the sporting field either. This is an image from Boston City Centre, Boston Municipal City Centre, about their weekly check-in, what are the numbers that they're looking at. And their scoreboard may be very different, but again, you know, they've got, interestingly, trend on shootings, trend on stabbings, missed trash on time, graffiti incidents. They're tracking all of the critical numbers that they need to really drop on in terms of get sorted out in that particular city. Or as you move even more towards the business world, you know, I've just recently been to a summit with Bloomberg, and you cannot fail to be impressed with the data and the metrics that they bring in order to their decision-making process in that. So as the great Tom Peters talks about, what gets measured gets done. And I want to sort of keep coming back to that as we go through this particular webinar. What gets measured gets done. So one of the outputs that came from our planning session today, and I use in terms of, it goes hand in glove with some of the scaling up tools, is what's called the vision summary. So just like we have in terms of the sports field, in terms of, you know, there's the rules in which we're going to play the game out. There are boundaries on the sports field in which we can play the game out. The same in business. Our core values set down what it is, the boundaries between right and wrong. Our purpose gives us a sense of why and a sense of direction as to where we're heading. And our brand promises give certain clarity and conviction to what we're doing. And then today, actually, into the coaching session, we challenged, again, the big, hairy, audacious goal. Was it the right big, hairy, audacious goal for the business? So the game that we're going to go and play out, are we playing it in the right way, into the maximum of our abilities? So if you then put this on to, in real time, one of my clients are in the steel fabrication industry, I can see in terms of the game board or the play board or the playbook that we want to play out, the core values, the purpose, the brand promise, and then the BHAG, and then bring it to the team player in terms of what the priorities are for the year ahead, what the quarterly priorities are. And then that really hones into their own quarterly priorities and accountability of when it needs to be done by, and then their own KPIs that they are charged on as well. And one of the areas that Jack Stack talks about in The Great Game of Business is this notion of the critical number. What are the critical numbers that we need to really obsess on? have on our scoreboard to, again, see whether or not we're winning or losing. So going back to Jack Stack, The Great Game of Business, Jack calls out 3 areas that we need to get focused on. Number 1, the importance of knowing and teaching the rules between what's right and what's wrong, between the core values and, again, how that gets impacted on the business, teaching people how to do a great job. And then he really digs deep into making sure he's got what I call an open book management philosophy, that they really much teach their team members how to be financially literate, how to be able to understand balance sheet, how to be able to understand the P&L. That goes for everybody in that organization, so they can follow the action and keep score in that particular area. By doing that, they're able to make sure that they keep the main thing. And it's easy, as many of you know on the call today, easy to drift, easy to lose sight on what's really important in your business. But having that critical number, making sure that's the main thing, and that everybody in the organizations knows what you're heading to, means that you can get real alignment around that. So once we've got the critical number down, then we need to make sure that we've got a process from which to follow the action and keep score. So let's have a think around some of the tools we use in order to help us follow the action and keep score. First up, what I want to talk about here is key performance indicators, or KPIs. So those critical metrics, those elements of data that we want to measure, those most important ones we call key performance indicators. Now, you might have lots of performance indicators, but it's actually the KPIs, or key performance indicators, which we might just have 7 or 8 of, that really drive our business in terms of where our focus needs to be, where our priorities are, helping people understand what are those metrics in place. And what I've got here in terms of, we talk about the idea of having balanced metrics. So the balance between having people metrics on the one hand, and we've got our stakeholders, and we've got our employees, and we've got our customers, have been engaged with the performance of the company. And then on the other hand, have we got process metrics, or process KPIs? So just to bring this real, for those of you maybe, what could these look like? If we then think around employee KPIs, employee metrics, have we got the right KPIs in place to make sure that we've got the right relationships with happy and engaged employees? So for employees, it could be reward and recognition, an employee net promoter score. Have we got issues with absentee and sickness? Are we retaining our top talent? How long does it take us to hire? So all those could be KPIs around that. Around customers, are we retaining our top customers? Have we got quality where it needs to be? Are we growing our customers? And again, a really neat metric around net promoter score. Shareholders, so if you've got investors, have they got the right numbers coming through to keep them happy? Are the banks, if you've got banking covenants that need to be met, critical numbers around that. Processes, again, we look at 3 processes here: sales, production, and record keeping. Have we got good sales pipeline value coming through? How long does it take us to convert from leads, and what is our conversion rate? In the production area, we learn about the labor efficiency ratio and production efficiency. So these can all be captured as key metrics. And then have we got the right record keeping? Lots of different KPIs that you can look at in this particular area. These are ones that we've just settled on for this particular company. And then when you settle on your KPIs, then it's important to find a way of tracking whether or not you're on target, i.e. the scoreboard is you're winning, or you're falling short of target. So in this example, one of my clients uses a color-coded basis just to help them track all of their KPIs. So in this example, we can see that wherever it's green, well, we're on target and everything is fine where it needs to be. For example, conversion rate or net promoter score is fine. Debtor days, gross profit, labor efficiency ratio, net profit, not quite where they need to be, but it's not a critical drop off. And then where everything is in red, that's a red alert, all attention needs to be, and what we maybe need to do to bring that turnover back up to budget. So again, a really easy way just to reflect on, once we've got clarity on what the right KPIs are, how we've got a great way, a robust way of measuring these areas. And once you've done that, then I think it's really important, just like the scoreboard at the end of the baseball game or at the end of the rugby pitch, is that you've got some sort of monthly dashboard or dashboard to make it easy for people to see whether we're on target or we're falling short. So this is one of my clients in Ireland, quite visual. Yes, they like the visual sort of representation of their numbers, but for them, one of the critical numbers is the number of containers shipped. So we're bringing an idea of the shipping with containers coming over, just helps them visualize where they are, or how much cash they got on hand, or how long does it take to the average lead time. Whatever it takes, you just find a way of keeping it visual. Or that could be in the sort of boardroom, but actually how do you also make it so that if you're having a huddle with maybe the manufacturing team, this is a team I was with yesterday, how do you make sure that you've got around the huddle, the team board, so they can see how they're performing day in and day out, or week in and week out. So this forms a nice backdrop, or again in the boardroom, are we on target against what we set out to do? So again, different ways, from screens, plasmas, the boardroom, again in the boardroom in terms of keeping up to date with what's the score around this. For those of you who again are conversant with Jack Stack and the Great Game of Business, so I was lucky enough to go and have a look around SRC a couple of years ago in Springfield, Missouri, and I was just really impressed on everywhere that you looked around the manufacturing site. There were visuals, there were plasma screens up. How many October engines were shipped? Are we ahead or behind target? What's the variance? Every single operative knew exactly where they were, week in, week out, what they need to do and what activity or action they need to take to get back onto target again. And again, targets up there, were they ahead of target, were they behind target? I was really impressed about bringing that scoreboard to life so they could take action around it. The guys with yesterday, again, have actually got, interestingly, had that sporting analogy I talked about earlier. They've actually brought a whole football pitch into their production office. So again, bring an analogy about what do we need to do to make sure we tighten up our defense, what do we need to do in terms of midfield to make sure that we've got all of the processes working well, and actually in terms of attack, what are the different areas that we can focus on to improve the business performance. Just a lovely visual, really brings to the team clarity about what needs to be done in that perspective. These guys just wanted to bring up now the analogy that I often like to use. If you're an athlete, more often than not, certainly if you're an Olympic athlete, but any athlete for that measure, has probably got some sort of personal best that they're tracking. So if they're running marathons, this is probably, when I ran marathons a few years ago, my goal was just to get to the 4-hour mark. So I can't claim this is my personal record, but if I was, and it's great to keep those things as your personal best. And the same in business. Why wouldn't you have a personal best board where you can set down maybe manufacturing records, sales records, volume records, profitability records for that matter, and have them visual? A great opportunity then to push yourself to say, well, this month we're going to smash a personal best or a record and keep it visible. Great way of then celebrating and rewarding that. Actually, this is the company that I've been working with today. They're a galvanizing experts, helping galvanize steel here in the Midlands in the United Kingdom. And we've been working today using a proprietary bit of software called Align Today, which I use with most of my clients. It just helps me really keep in terms of what is the key focus of the business, the one-page plan, what are the priorities in the organization. So we're able to, again, as we saw from the one-page plan and the vision summary, capture on a software as a service solution the values, the purpose, the big, hairy, audacious goal, what's forever, and the brand promises. And then on a daily basis, open up and see the company dashboard and where we are in terms of tonnage shipped for the quarter against our role. And interesting with this particular organization, one of the things we really noticed, one of the challenges this particular company had was staff attrition. They had something like 15% attrition every month, which meant over the course of 8 months, pretty much their whole team had turned over. That was hurting them big time. So we put in place a whole raft of tactics and strategies to improve employee engagement, retain talent, look after and care for their employees. And that's come down from a target that was 10%. Now we're seeing it 6.3%. So again, just being able to track on a daily basis numbers and what gets measured gets done, as well as being able to have the accountability that goes with clarity of priorities. Where are they, and are we on track to achieve those priorities? Metrics, accountability exactly what you do on the sporting field, exactly what we need to do in the boardroom as well. It's not just in terms of that sort of high level performance that you can monitor, but you've got to bet your bottom dollar that on the sports field, and I think we just picked up on this analogy today. I think it was a great John Wooden, who was a basketball coach for UCLA, who famously said, it's actually not how hard we train for game day that's synonymous with our character, but it's how hard we coach for the practice days in between that to make sure we're on top of our game. So I use, again, another proprietary bit of software called the Growth Institute. And what I love about this is not only has it got world-class online master courses that are right for mid-market companies, but we've got visual software and measurement abilities to look at who has been learning, what they've been learning, have they completed the course with, and what is the implementation learnings they've taken away from that. So we can learn and track and measure P&Ls, but we can also track and learn our performance when it comes to learning. Are we fit to play the game at the weekend? Are we fit to practice as hard as we need to? So that's what we can measure that. And then I want to come on to, okay, that's measurement now. How do we make sure we're communicating in a way that we allow people to follow the action? And one of the most powerful ways that you can do this, and it's interesting at the moment, Zoom have got an advertising campaign across London. I don't know if it's like this across the rest of the world, but they call it Huddle Happy. Zoom for the conference call. And again, having a daily huddle, 10 minutes, quarter of an hour in the war room, getting everybody up to date with what's important, what the priorities are for the day, what the metrics we need to achieve are, and making sure that if there are any stucks or any blockages that they are worked through. So really advocate, with all the clients I work with, that there's a pulsing rhythm that you can then look at what the metrics and reinforce, a bit like they do in the sports field, the halftime chat, as it were, just making sure everyone's ready to go again to play the second half with more intensity maybe than the first half. Which brings me nicely on to this notion of the game, the great game of business. And that's what I love about the analogy in terms of, if you can imagine the rigor that they go to in terms of the sports field and then bring that into the boardroom that Jack Stack teaches us. There's so many really neat analogies. So just again, reinforce that learning I talked about a few minutes ago. Think about it this way. Educate your team first and foremost. Why wouldn't you? Someone again brought it up at coaching today. Well, Neil, what happens if we teach our team when they just we'll build them up, they'll train them, they'll just walk away, they'll go somewhere else. And we just came on this wonderful quote from Richard Branson. He said something, I think I'd be right in the way it goes. He said, teach your team in a way and train your team so they are able to go. Look after them, treat them well so they want to stay, which I thought was a really neat way in terms of thinking about how you look after talent. So this is education, know and teach the rules. Follow the action and keeping score is about enabling the team to do whatever needs to get done. And then most importantly, people need to feel engaged with an organization. I think wherever I've been in the world, ever hear a keynote, it keeps coming back to this Gallup statistic that right now there are less than 20% of team members anywhere in the world are engaged in their job they're currently doing. What a waste of talent, what a waste of time. So having a stake in the outcome, making people feel like they're owners of your organization, not necessarily need to have shares, but they feel like they've got that. So this particular slide sort of elaborates a bit more around that. And I think when Jack really teaches everyone about financial transparency in education and that focus on the critical number, that's what he talks about, knowing and teaching the rules. Making sure, as we've been going through this webinar, that you're using scoreboards. Why? To show progress and accountability. Huddles create rhythm for communications engagement. And then those KPIs as metrics to commit to forecasts that then really move you ahead. And then that final thing, again, just in terms of ownership, offering a stake in outcome. And it could be anything from rewards and recognition to mini games to having that sort of degree. Maybe there is equity in that particular business. But what Jack talks about is this. He says, business has all the elements of a game. Your team wants to make sure there is a goal. Of course, we've got to make sure there are rules. Of course, we've got to make sure that there is a scoreboard. And just in terms of football or anything else, there is a reward for winning at the end of the season. That's what really brings around engagement, brings around growth performance. Nobody wants to play in a game if they don't know what the rules are, if they're not being educated, they don't know if they're winning or losing. And indeed, it's impossible to win around that. But how often does that happen? The way they are playing blind, they don't know what's important, they're not having one-to-ones, they're not being coached and developed to be able to make sure that they can win. I touched on this a bit earlier on. Open book management is really important in terms of a philosophy. You might think about, well, isn't it being too transparent with our numbers? Most people can find out from a bit of research about your business if they really want to, by going to fiscal postings and those sort of areas. So what I was really impressed with in terms of what Jack and the team did, this is in the canteen area at SRC. They've got the whole of the P&L and the balance sheet up posted in the refectory area, canteen area there. And each week, somebody will update everything from the sales, something from the shipments, goods sold, cost of goods, stock, expensive overheads, and all of them can read and understand the P&L. They can all understand what working capital looks like. I'm so impressed that actually, they were able to have that financial literacy. They go through and work out the GP percentage, work out the overheads, ask questions about why we got this ratio, what's going on in terms of pricing, all these things. Financially literate really helps them do that. And what they did, at the each weekly meet, there would be the coach at the beginning of the room. I think this was the actual finance director calling out from everybody to shout out if it was the head of sales, what the sales are going to look like that week. If it's head of procurement, what the cost of goods look like. And they just updated the spreadsheet behind him. So they knew precisely where they were. And because they had skin in the game, i.e. they were shareholders, boy, they wanted to make sure they were on top of whatever they could achieve around that. And just as you would do in terms of the sports field, you've got a playbook, how you're going to go and play out the next 90 days. That's exactly what we've been doing today. Almost set that playbook out. So coming out of that particular session, their coach was going to go around the factory with his playbook. What are the numbers we need to hit? What's the plays that we need to make over the next quarter? Probably this was over the next week that he was looking at. Not sure he looks mighty pleased. Maybe that was just the photograph I took of him at the time. But nonetheless, he was deadly serious about hitting his numbers. And what I was really impressed around was this opportunity at the weekly meet to hold up high performance, hold up people who've done well, celebrate success, celebrate birthdays. All of them felt engaged with the team that came from that. So that's very much in terms of reflecting a bit on the great game of business. The other tool I like to utilize, from my own perspective, so I can really follow the action and keep score, is a tool from Alan Miltz. Alan wrote the cash chapter in Scaling Up, and he's got this wonderful proprietary software we use called Cash Flow Story. And yesterday, as part of the board meeting, we used this whole process to make sure that we've got real rigor, focus, and discipline to the monthly meeting. So this is actually a fictitious company that Alan has made up that we utilize in the training, Williams Plumbing, but it could be any particular organization. Here's an annual dashboard. Once we set down what the revenue goals are, we can then track that. Are we ahead of that budget, behind budget? What's the comments? What do we need to do to get back on track? An opportunity to also look in terms of what's the critical number theme. In this case, for William, it was working capital, and then we can have scoreboards and scorecards to look at, is it good performance or great performance, okay, and how do we need to get back on track? So again, those of you that are thinking about, really getting some clarity and some rigor around sort of your financial numbers, I'd really advocate Cash Flow Story to do that. Again, bringing up to date with, in terms of, in this case, working capital performance that we were looking at yesterday. How do we improve the cash and EBIT that's coming into the business? And again, going back to the Cash Flow Story, as part of the quarterly planning session, we can look at, in terms of improvements in net profitability and what trends are there, operating profit, gross margin profit, what's happening in terms of revenue growth versus overhead growth. As we all know, growth sucks cash. So again, making sure that you've got tools in place that gives you that financial insight and the ability to make the right calls around that. And the importance, again, I've always learned, and Alan's taught me this all the time, that it's not necessarily the P&L that we should be worrying about, but how hard our working capital is working. So we're going straight to the balance sheet. And if you remember at the beginning of this webinar, I talked about marginal gains. This is one of the most impactful, powerful tools that I use in coaching. It's called the power of one. Again, it's Alan references it in the cash chapter in Scaling Up. But all we're doing here is just looking at the impact of 1% on 1% impact on price, 1% impact on volume. What's 1% impact if we are able to get better buying to reduce the COGS? What happens if we improve our accounts receivable days by 1? And again, we can then see what in scenario planning impact has on cash flow or in terms of operating profit. All we're doing here, what are the right metrics? What do we need to be doing in terms of improving the business performance? These marginal gains, the aggregation of marginal gains, this is actually just set at 1% for Williams Planning. But the 7 things at 1% actually, in putting all those together, bring in 1 million impact on cash flow for this example. Very, very powerful. So think about right out of this webinar, what are those little 1% that you can put into your business right away? What 1% savings can you do? What 1% wastage have you got across your business? Marginal gains, very, very important and very impactful. I think here's an area that often doesn't get measured as much as it should be or could be, and this is sales and marketing performance. Again, we were looking at yesterday, what are the sales activities in terms of clarity, in terms of new prospects that are coming through the pipeline. We're looking at other sheets in terms of our existing customer base. What more can we do to get more business out of our existing base? Have we got any red flags at all around our a new prospect pipeline or red flags around our existing clients that we can do something about? But really what gets measured gets done. If we've got then the ability to understand how many leads we need to have, what's the conversion rate, we can do something about it. So whether you're using a CRM like Salesforce and you've got a dashboard that you can see what your sales cycle length is, your contract value, cycle steps, what's in the pipeline value, again, what gets measured gets done. And not only what gets measured gets done, but what gets rewarded gets repeated. So the final just element I want to hone in on today is what Gene Brown has taught me from the City Bin Company. Gene runs a wonderful organization based out of Galway in Ireland that kind of stretch across Ireland. And he's a genius when it comes to understanding what's the theme, how do we set that to teach and know and teach the rules, and then have some sort of reward around it. So one of the latest themes that is put in place is called own goal. And what Gene said by his own words is, look, we're still doing okay, but actually we're allowing our competitors to catch up on it. Maybe dropping the ball in a few areas. In his words, we're scoring a few own goals, and that's hurting us right now. So the theme came own goal, and it then brought around what are the things that we're missing a trick on. Could be uncollected bins, an instructional process not followed. We've been slow, rude, or had poor responses. They brainstormed those two areas, put a target or a goal to improvement, and then week by week they set out to make those improvements. And as you can see here, the first 3 or 4 weeks they didn't hit the target at all. There's 1 or 2 things that they needed to improve on, and then by week 5 they got green across the board. They were on target. They were then able to celebrate that particular area, or as he puts it, goal. And when they achieved a particular reward, then there was a payout, and it could have been a spot prize. And to somebody who's maybe a lorry driver, for Eric, winning €1,000 was a significant amount of money. But Gene goes the next stage. It's not about rewarding, but actually celebrating that success as well, making sure that that's done the right way. And of course, it doesn't always happen, but there's visuals beautifully done to reward that as well. So just to sort of refresh where we started off. Again, to think about it this way, the great game of business, just like on a sporting field, as in the boardroom, we need to understand what the rules are. And it's interesting, going back to a client I've been working with for about 5 years. In fact, I'm just seeing here the one-page plan, an engineering company based in Derby, and think about know and teach the rules. So they put in their OPSP one-page strategic plan that by 2018 they want to achieve 5 million, and that was coming from a base of just having 1 million turnover and 6 employees. it's great that they made a submission a few weeks ago to the Rail Industry Awards. That's the space they're in as the fastest growing company in the UK. And it's wonderful to see how they've tracked and measured on their scoreboard staff growth, turnover growth, and most importantly, EBITDA growth as well. A true Gazelle's company, growing more than 20% year on year for 3 years or more. And it was wonderful that they're in a perspective that they were able to celebrate success recently at those awards, going away with the fastest growing company in the rail industry. But again, the business element, there was a goal, there were rules they had to go, but there was a scoreboard that they had in that submission, and fantastic that there was a reward for winning as well. So I think that's the key area of the webinar I just wanted to go through in terms of the webinar. Eugene, over to you now to see what questions you'd like me to answer.
Thank you very much, Neil. I'm actually going to turn it over to Henry, who does have a few questions that have been posed.
Yeah, and people can continue submitting questions via the Q&A tool. I'm curious if you advocate for having specific individuals accountable for keeping critical numbers updated and for the results of those.
So, just so I'm clear on that, curious in terms of why you would do that?
Yes, do you advocate for having individuals accountable for specific critical numbers?
Well, there's a number of things that I'd address to that. So, again, without accountability, things can tend to get dropped or really don't get focused on. So, there's two tools I think I've talked to in here. One is the vision summary, and that is about making sure that individually we've got our own performance goals, our own initiatives we want to achieve in any given quarter, and then having KPIs around that. I think everyone that has got line of sight of what's important, that's important. The other thing we touched on today, interestingly enough, is having some sort of process accountability chart, or indeed functional accountability chart. Again, what gets measured gets done. So for many of you, you might not have anybody who's really honed in terms of the sales process and having accountability for making sure that's in a robust place, or in the process for getting cash collection done. But once you've got somebody who's accountable for that and there's a measurement around it, then lo and behold, they're going to take responsibility for making either process improvements or improving that particular number. And if you then got that visible somewhere, lo and behold, it just brings it to the fore.
Great. So a lot of the metrics you talked about were around production and output, but have you seen any novel or good uses of critical numbers to measure internal processes and internal employee engagement and satisfaction?
So I think going back to the point I made earlier, from the Gallup poll, employee engagement is one of the most challenging things for any organization right now. And interestingly, I referenced Jack Stack and the Great Game of Business. Their critical number for 2019 was people. Was all around people. It was around engagement. By their own admission, they were recognizing it was harder and harder to get people want to come and work in a manufacturing organization, much more sexy to go into tech or something like that. And then secondly, how do you go about retaining, growing, and developing those people? So when he had that critical number around people, underneath that critical number, there was a whole raft of strategies and tactics. One, to build an employee brand, how to go about making sure that you've got retention strategies, how do you go about training and developing your people in the right way, how do you see how many A players you've got, how do you make sure that you're a great company to work for. I think that company that I've just referenced, Aegis here, one of the things that they've done really well this year to boost employee engagement is really focus on simple things like wellness, making sure there's an environment where people can be more productive. That's been something that they've really honed in on, and they measure each of these different elements around these things. So I think one of the key takeouts for anybody who wants to have a strategic advantage going into 2020 is, what are you doing right now to train and develop your team? What are you doing right now to measure that particular area? What are you doing to make sure that you've got more engaged employees? We've all referenced and heard about numbers like the employee net promoter score. That might be fine, but there might be more depth that you need to go to in terms of really getting engagement scores around that. So What I'll do, Henry, I'll come up with some other ideas around engagement at the end of the webinar that I'll put out there, okay?
Great.
Neil, Peter has asked the question of whether there is some software that will help with a KPI dashboard like the one that you were showing.
Yeah, actually, there's a few that I've put out there. Actually, both of the ones that I put out there actually were developed by the company themselves. So they've just played around with a sort of a bit of PowerPoint, I think. I'm sure there is software that can be used. Again, Henry, you can just drive me that question. I'll see if I can find out if there is any other specific software. For those of you who are struggling with KPIs, there's a wonderful website called, I think it's www.kpilibrary.com, which is a great reference point for anything from operational KPIs, people KPIs, sales KPIs, marketing KPIs. That's called www.kpilibrary.com.
And Neil, more fundamentally, do you have any strong feelings about how many critical numbers a company should have in a given quarter? And do critical numbers change quarter over quarter, or should they be consistent?
Good question. So Jack Stack talks about, his notion is, having the one sort of critical number. More often than not, with most of the clients I coach, we will have two, almost as that balancing KPI. Let me see if I can bring it up right at the beginning of the session. But they will want to have something that's one around people KPIs. Have we got people who are happy and engaged in that particular area of the workforce? And then have we got some sort of process KPIs? So again, I think it's a good idea that you've got some sort of balance in terms of your metrics. So today we focused in on one of our critical numbers was EBITDA. Unsurprising for a lot of companies, again, EBITDA is a critical measure. And then conversely, on the people side, was a critical number around employee retention, to make sure that we're looking after and doing a stunning job with that. And actually, that's just a continuation of the critical number from the previous 6 months, and we'll keep that going until as long as it's relevant. Once you've got into sort of the flow on something, I think Jack he keeps his critical number going for a whole year. But there's no reason why, if you've achieved that critical number, it's no longer an issue for the business, that you can move on to something else. But maybe not have more than 2 critical numbers at any given time. And then the rest I would call key performance indicators that you'd just be focusing on, but they're not the ones that you're obsessing about day in and day out.
Got it. All right. Well, I'll leave the chat open for another minute or two if anyone has any final questions. Let's see if we get any. Lou, I think the website was kpilibrary.com. Is that correct, Neil?
Yes, it is. Again, I'll double sense check that, and if I've got it slightly wrong, then we'll make sure we let the guys know exactly what it is.
And we'll include a link when we circulate a recording of this webinar as well.
Good stuff. Good questions.
Any other questions from the audience? Seeing none, I would like to thank everybody for attending today's Coach webinar, and obviously a big thank you to Neil for a great presentation. If any of you have any questions about what has been presented, please don't hesitate to contact me at eturk@aligntoday.com, or if you have any questions about the Align software and its ability to track critical numbers and KPIs, you can always send questions to support@aligntoday.com. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Please mark your calendars for our next Coach webinar and our first of the 2020 calendar year, which will be on January 15th with Chuck Coker, or Chuck Kocher, actually. Kocher. I always mispronounce that. Chuck Kocher of the Transformation Company, who will be presenting on New Year, New Habits, Elevating Your Strategic Execution in 2020. So I hope that you will all join us then. Till that time, we all hope that you have a great day and a wonderful holiday season. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.